and welcome everyone to tonight's episode 32, a conversation with Rachel Vaughan. Rachel is a survivor of SRA and MK Ultra. She has dedicated years of her life in speaking up for the voiceless and trying to bring awareness of the horrific crimes committed to thousands upon thousands of children. Her first-hand experience and knowledge opens a door to a dark world that has been hidden from the public. Rachel is a true warrior. She has survived, spoken the truth, and is here to educate us. She's here to heal and awaken our souls to fight for the children. I'm really, really honoured to have her join this space tonight, and I'll just get you, Rachel, to turn your camera on.
Hello.
Hey.
Julia, it was a lovely intro, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, I've been following your story for a couple of years now, and it's a real honour to have you here because you really bring something very special to the world, and it's just powerful to have to even sort of experience and sort of understand what the strength that you have. So maybe we'll just start a little bit about your story.
Sure. So for those who haven't heard of me, I've been speaking out about childhood abuses that I experienced in Adelaide, South Australia. I was a child in the 70s and 80s, and I've been trying to get a paedophile ring put away, including my father, since 2006, and that has meant countless letters, emails to people in power, authorities, members of parliament, police, all of the authorities over police in my state, federal police, ombudsman, ministers for police, all of those people that you possibly go for. And when none of that actually worked, I did finally get some leeway. I went to a very good member of parliament in South Australia here, and she had the Special Crimes Unit finally look into my father's crimes against me, specifically just the crimes against me, not the murders that he perpetrated. But sort of halfway through that investigation, he died rather conveniently. So you can't convict a corpse, so they stopped investigating then, which is pretty crazy when you think about there's a whole ring of these people. They're still operating, but because he died, and I do wonder if he got dispatched because it was inconvenient, it all just gets pushed under the carpet again and ignored.
Can you talk a little bit about your childhood and some of the things that you witnessed your father do and some of the things that you experienced?
Well, let's hope your audience has got a strong stomach. So,
and just before you start, this is to some viewers, if you're listening to this for the first time, it might be a bit difficult. So, but I do encourage people to open your heart to this because it's really quite important that this gets spoken about because there's a lot of children, as Rachel will say, that have suffered this. So, sorry, continue.
So my father, as Debbie Marshall in her book Banquet described, worked for Channel 9. I hadn't seen until recently that she'd actually written that in her book. That's page 265. He was a telecom wiretapper or a telephone line tapper. So he would listen in on people's conversations, and that led him to be in a very, very comfortable position to do blackmailing. And so I was used in his honeypot operations. I did an interview with Sean Atwood, and in that I described him as Australia's Epstein, and I believe he really was. My brother Andrew and I are convinced that our father was an ASIO operative. He was so well protected, it's just ridiculous. So my abuse has ranged from sexual abuse of myself by my father, sexual abuse by his friends. I was used in child rape material, both filmed and photographed. I witnessed horrific things being done to other children, far worse than what I experienced. He did use a knife on me internally for some of his exploits, what he enjoyed sexually. And that is a typical thing in Adelaide, sadly. And that's, those wounds are lifelong. Really, what happened to me was just a fraction of what I saw him do to other people. So he didn't just murder children, he murdered adults as well. What really concerns me is someone with that caliber of sadism and the group of people that he was with were into the same thing. I mean, I was at a ritual where a baby was murdered in a horrific way with a bonfire, and then they ate his flesh. So, and that was there was about 50 adults at that particular ritual. There were about 9 of us children that were forced to watch, and then just really horrific stuff.
Is that what you would describe as satanic ritual abuse?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So there were very strange rituals that were involved as well. And this is the thing, if it's very clever what they do, because what they do is they'll abuse you, they'll rape you, with the pornography, they'll do that as well. But they'll also take you to these rituals. And so if you were to describe those, you suddenly get immediately discredited, because most people can't even fathom that these things exist. Thankfully, there are countless survivors speaking out now about the rituals that they've been taken to. And if people don't believe that these things happen, I mean, I actually envy them, because it would be nice to be ignorant of it. But I think the last few years have taught, well, I'd like to say the majority of people, but a large number of people now understand that there are things going on in the world that aren't right, and that we're ruled over by some very strange, sadistic individuals.
I actually had a conversation today. I was working today, and it was interesting that you point that out, because a lot of people still have no idea.
Yeah.
And I was sort of just like, it's hard to deep dive into this topic when you're having lunch, but they were sort of asking me what I'm doing, and I was like, yeah, I'm doing this interview, and I was like, what is it about? And I said, told them what I'm going to be speaking to you about, and they were like, what, this is happening in Australia? And I'm like, yeah. And I didn't even talk really deeply about what we were going to be talking about tonight. And that you could feel like that drop in the energy. And unfortunately, still people have no idea. There is a lot of people that are awake now, but it is having these conversations, as dark as they are, because we have to shine the light on them. Because as what you've spoken about, a lot of these children that have passed, and even, people like yourself who have survived, the perpetrators are not going to get that. They're not going to be, well, it seems like they're getting away with it, a lot of it. And we have to find a way to heal collectively, because it affects all of us. I just feel that so deeply. So are you one of 4 siblings, or is it?
There's actually 7.
Oh,
One
7.
has, sadly, I believe she's suicided. So I believe she was murdered in 2009. That's my oldest sister. There's Ruth, Andrew, myself, 2 other siblings that I won't name. They own the Stansbury property that needs to be investigated. And a 7th sibling came forward in 2012. And I've just put a video discussing some of the issues around him. My father impregnated his mother. They lived a couple of streets away from us. So he was born in 84, I believe. Mm-hmm. So around the time that he was doing these things to myself and Louise Bell and Richard Kelvin in a hidden cellar beneath our home at 8 Macklin Street, Edwardstown, he was fathering a child 2 streets away. And he kept that secret until 2012, when his son came forward. And it was definitely, I mean, this poor young man had my father's revolting hands, so it's most definitely his child. Very distinctive hands. So that gives people a bit of an understanding of how well he kept secrets. I don't know how many siblings I've got out there, probably quite a few.
How about your mum? Like, where was she throughout all of this, of your abuse as well?
So she was very much a victim of him as well. My mother is extremely easy to hypnotize, and he used hypnosis. He would click his fingers and say a couple of words, and she'd be under. And so
really?
Protection. Yeah, it's called rapid induction.
Okay.
So when I first started speaking about this, some person came up in the comments of the video. I was discussing it and said, "Oh, rapid induction doesn't work that way." Well, I looked into it, and it does. If you've got someone that you've had under your spell, under hypnosis, and you've done that multiple times to that person, you can do it that easily. Yeah. So my father's first wife, Margaret, died in very disturbing circumstances. She had tried to check herself out of a mental health facility, was detained, and she was found dead the next morning. And that was at the time that my mother had already produced a child to my father, not knowing that he was married and had 3 children already. And had my father divorced his first wife instead of having her murdered, he would have had to have sold the house at 8 Macklin Street, Edwardstown, which had the bunker and the hidden cellar and led to all the tunnels that I was trafficked through. So that wasn't going to happen. So poor Margaret, she died. So my mother obviously would have realised, oh my God, not only is he married, his wife's just died. I've got 3 children that I have to look after, plus a baby I've just had. She was 21, and he just controlled her. So, yeah, sadly I was abused in front of her, and she was just in another world. She was somewhere else. She certainly betrayed her.
Sounds like he had some, it's like you start to think about, where did he learn these techniques and skills from? Because that's not something that, you just like read about on the internet. This is something that I would assume is taught.
I'd say he was involved with some very dodgy people from very early on. He was a devotee of Aleister Crowley, so he was obsessed with Egyptology, ancient Egypt, the demonic beings that they worshipped. He had a very intelligent man. He had an extensive knowledge of esoterics, otherworldly things. He knew a lot.
Wow.
It also helps to understand too, his 3rd wife was a psychologist.
Okay, and at what time frame did she come into your life?
She came in when I was 13.
Okay, so psychologist. How did you, as a kid growing up, because you obviously had to develop some sort of coping mechanisms. Did you have any sort of outlets, or were you able to? What was it? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So like most people, or children especially, who go through that sort of abuse, I had a dissociative aspect. So I would go off into another little world when he was abusing me, or I had a very strong spiritual belief. I would pray. My main way of coping, I suppose, at conscious times, was to play with my animals. I had a lot of animals, a lot of pets, and my friends were a great source of escape. So I would do a lot of sleepovers with them. And the weird thing is, I'd have a lot of anxiety about leaving my mother with him. So I would get homesick, even though I was away and safe. I'd be worried about what he was doing to her while I was gone. So it was a bit of a dichotomy. But after she left him when I was 13, I was more free to go and spend those times with my friends and sleep over at their houses, and that was a saving grace. To be with a normal family, to see how they interacted with each other, was really beautiful.
Wow. You spoke about the tunnels a little bit. I know that you've done a lot of research. Like there's a document that you shared in a Dropbox file, where I think it's Dropbox. Anyway, there's a lot of research, and so, because obviously I think you've said in past interviews is that if you can talk about, if you disclose abuse, but you can't actually highlight can you hear that?
No.
In this weird sound coming through.
Is it demonic?
Yeah.
Is it really? I had that with Adrian D'Amico when I did the interview with him.
Holy shit. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. That's weird. Okay. It's really creepy. Okay, sorry, I'm not going crazy.
The fridge is working, but I think it's been making that the whole time.
No, it's not the fridge. Okay, let's just keep going. So the tunnels, so what I was saying, if you can't locate the incident of the abuse, right, it's almost like it doesn't exist. So can you talk a little bit about that, as well as how you started your research into the tunnels?
I mean, it's, again, so incredibly clever. So there's quite a few cases where children have been abused in underground spaces. So the McMartin preschool case is a brilliant example, and they did find the tunnels eventually. All these poor children were being abused at a childcare centre because they were being talking about tunnels and underground spaces that supposedly didn't exist. they were discredited, but later on the tunnels were found. So I think that did lead to prosecutions in the case of the people who owned the McMartin preschool. There's so many different ways that they try and get away with the abuses. So obviously the tunnels were not documented. I had to go through so much to find that information. I had the most beautiful researchers reach out to me and help me.
Wow.
None of them got paid, and it was, I don't know how many hours. It was 2.5 years of pretty much my spare time and their spare time putting this stuff together. Just can't thank those people enough for what they did. But what I did there was prove, and even a young man had done a thesis on it, but he hadn't uncovered the particular tunnels in my Edwardstown sort of area. He found 544 shelters and tunnels in Adelaide in his thesis, but I found more that weren't covered, and I can see why. They've really covered this up. A couple of my friends were looking at an opening on the railway station at Edwardstown, and they just got up on the platform, and two guys from houses just next close to the platform came out and yelled, "Get them," and chased them off the platform. So this place, there's 14 cameras on that platform now. The infrastructure for the Edwardstown railway station is the responsibility of the Edwardstown Freemasons, and you can find that on Wikipedia. Why? It's federal land. Why would the Freemasons in Edwardstown be responsible for the infrastructure? The landscaping. I think they called it the landscaping. Mm-hmm. And shortly after I started making noise about the tunnels in that area and that particular opening in the railway platform, they raised everything off the platform. They took down the shelter, and they put up all these cameras and put a new shelter up, which you can't really sit in without getting wet if it rained anyway.
Wow. And so how big are these tunnels?
Different sizes and shapes. So okay. Some of them are quite large.
I've got that document here. Can I maybe show?
Yeah, brilliant.
Just because I think a visual will be really handy to have. Wow, that sound is really strange.
Okay.
Wow. And I'm
getting... What was happening with Adrian, I actually got myself a mic. I've got a new camera and mic now, so it shouldn't be that, because I've had lots of interviews with this camera and mic and haven't had any problems.
I'm getting comments that people can hear it. So it's not just me.
Well, I've got an audio recording happening, because I always take an audio recording of every interview I do, just in case. Yeah. So I can prove it's not happening at this end.
Yeah, wow. All right, so this is one of the links to what you have available on your, I think from BitChute, from one of your videos.
Yeah. Yep.
And well, maybe I'll just slowly scroll through it, and if there's anything that you want to point out, like obviously
this is actually the older version. I put this out in 21.
Okay. Yep.
This is the one that Dale Holmes put out for me. There's a newer one that I'm sharing on my Telegram channel, t.me/Rachel Vaughan, and as it's spelled here, and it's a lot more information. Basically, I've actually named addresses.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this one, do you want to leave this one then?
Oh no, this is still good. This is still good. A lot of it's still in there, but I went all out with the new one. Okay,
great.
So that photograph there is a shelter in the UK that looked very much like the kiln underneath the shed at my father's property. Mm-hmm. That was the best and closest I could get estimation to, the visual of what it was like inside, except it wasn't open at the back. It was closed at the back.
Yeah, that video, that link to that video, I watched that as well. It's
fascinating.
Fascinating. It's
yeah.
Was there anything else that you thought that maybe perhaps would be useful to point out in regards to the tunnels from this document? Or actually, I'll let you answer the question first, and then
if you scroll a bit further down, I think we might actually see some of the Edwardstown railway station information. I'll say, this is pretty interesting. This is the Morphettville Racecourse, which is not far from where I grew up. And there's this massive tunnel opening there. It's obviously for stormwater. So the different kinds of tunnels that I was being trafficked through included stormwater tunnels, which are large. You could drive a car through. That one. There's another one at Camden Park that you could drive a car through, and one in Goodwood. The one in Goodwood's very short. I haven't been into the one in Camden Park that I'm aware of. So these are the larger openings, obviously for water. You've got the telecommunications tunnels that are the Telstra tunnels that are on every main road in Australia. So you can see them when you're walking on the footpath because they've got metal plates that sit on top of them. They've got a T for Telstra, used to be Telecom. Where there's 4 plates or 6 or 8, that's where you've got one of the larger pits. The two plate ones usually aren't big enough for you to get into, but where the larger ones are, the 4, 6 or 8 plates, there's a space under there that's 6 feet deep. It's got a ladder. It's maybe 2 meters wide or bigger, and you can move around there quite comfortably. Sometimes they're closed at either end of the pit. Sometimes they're the tunnel. You can walk for miles, literally. It's yeah.
Wow.
All of those tunnel maps in South Australia were taken from the Postmaster General's department around 1980s when it turned into Telecom. So only the Telecom workers have the maps, but you can see it on the footpath. It's pretty easy. This is the Avoca Hotel tunnel. The Avoca Hotel's not far from where I grew up. There's a bunker at 862 South Road, Australian Motors Mazda. They call it the Dungeon, but that's an old telecommunications bunker, and that's only a couple of streets from where I grew up. And these telecommunication bunkers always had tunnels between them so that you could run an emissary or run wires in between. This, I think, might have been part of one of those systems. It doesn't have any function, this tunnel under the Avoca. It's in the cellar there. There's also a section of the cellar that's really interesting. It's got all these bricked up sections that look like they could go off into other tunnelled areas, but they've been bricked off.
Right. Wow.
And that tunnel under the Avoca used to be used as a makeshift morgue.
Wow.
So this is some of the maps that I went through. I went through the SAPA map system, and this one was actually provided by Marion Council. So where the blue lines are, you can see that's where the smaller stormwater tunnels are. They're usually only about 1 metre across. That's where your avenues and terraces come into play. So anything that's an avenue or a terrace usually has the water tunnels going through them. But these are only the smaller ones.
Yeah.
So I'm still looking for the larger water tunnels in the area. My father said that his tunnel that led from the bunker underneath the house at 8 Mackland Street went all the way to the tram line. So from what I can tell, I think it actually intersected underneath the old Glandore Boys home, where there's some weird stuff that needs to be looked at. I put up a video about that not long ago. So this is just an example here of, so we have King Street, and at the end of King Street, there's all of these, the holes that you have in the footpath that allows the stormwater to go down into the drains. There's about a bank of about 8 of those. There's normally one on the street, every 500 metres or so. There's about 8. This is just a little tiny cul-de-sac. But there's a line that goes up to Margaret Street on the council map, Marion Council map, that is a weird purple colour. There's no other lines on the entire map that colour. So I still don't know what that is about, but it's in a very, very significant location. I don't want to go too much into that, but there's a perp in the area. He's still alive, and I believe still abusing. Very powerful individual. Or he was. He's very old now, and he's going to get older and older and older.
You spoke about that Max Egan as well. Was aware of the tunnels, and he had strong connections to the Beaumont children. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So he grew up, he said, on the same block or within a couple of streets of where they grew up. And he used to play with them, and they used to play in the stormwater tunnels. So when I spoke to Max about, what my experiences were, he knew it was true because he'd been doing it himself. He'd been playing with the kids, lucky he didn't have worse experiences. I know he had one very bad experience on Somerton Beach when he was very small. That was a horrific experience. He's spoken about that publicly. I don't want to keep talking about it publicly because that's his information. But Max Egan knows about child trafficking because he's been the subject of horrific abuse. And he's spoken about it.
Okay. Maybe this is a good segue to start talking about the Beaumont children, because the anniversary has recently just passed. So Australia Day, if I'm correct, in 1966.
So it's coming up on the 26th. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It's not Australia Day yet.
Yeah. Time just goes too fast.
I don't know what day it is. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So my father has admitted that Anthony Munro, a now thrice convicted pedophile who abused his son Andrew, my brother, brought the deceased Beaumont children in the boot of a car to our 8 Macklin Street, Edwardstown property. It was number 2 back then. They changed the numbering. On the day they went missing in 1966. My sister Ruth has long maintained that she saw the children in the boot. My sister Claire also saw the children in the boot, according to Ruth. Claire is now dead because she made an appointment to talk about this at the Major Crime Department. The next day she was found dead. When she made the appointment, and the next day she was found dead. Andrew was also there on the day. He didn't see the children, but he did see the blood and sand in Munro's car. So there was a group of people working together. So these 3 children were taken from the same family. This is the first time anything like that had happened in Australia, apart from what's been happening to the Indigenous population forever. Only reason why it became a big deal was because they were white. So yeah, 3 children were taken from the one family. In the lead up to their disappearance, my father and a group of men and my brother Andrew, who was a child at the time, were leading a salvage and exploration expedition at Glenelg Beach. There's a diary that puts them all at the beach in the weeks leading up to the disappearance of the children. My father also worked at the Glenelg Exchange as a telecom worker at that time, so he had reason to be there. That diary information came out in a Tammy Mills article with The Age years ago. Still wasn't enough for them to dig at Stansbury though. But that's really pivotal evidence to put my father there and his group of pedophiles. So there was one of my perpetrators was involved with that group that was doing the salvage and expedition work.
And what I find that, like, hearing your story and the story of the Beaumont children, amongst other stories that are happening around Australia, is that there's a thread that specific police officers and judiciary, they're not investigating these crimes. No. So it's very concerning because there are a lot of families that are losing their children all the time. Like, I did an interview with Dee, Paul and Graham Bell a couple of weeks ago in regards to Operation Noetic, and that was just a small little, it's really it's hard to listen to that it's happening in Australia. But so you've said you've made multiple you've tried to talk to the police a lot, and they're not actually, and you're actually doing a there's a petition as well to try and dig up because you believe, you were talking about that the children may be buried at Salisbury, is that right?
Yeah, at Stansbury on the
Stansbury.
Yeah,
sorry.
So McIntyre Place, Stansbury. My father used to own the property. It was my grandfather's property originally. Interestingly, he was also a telecom worker or a telecommunications worker. The man who actually my father bought the property at Edwardstown off was also a telecommunications worker. So he had the bunker beforehand, and it was a telecommunications bunker. It was an old brick kiln turned into a telecommunications bunker, and then it was sold to my father, who was also in the telecom industry, which is very pertinent. So Andrew is certain that the children were deposited in an old sinkhole at Stansbury on my father's property. There was a whole furor afterwards when my grandfather was talking about a terrible smell coming from the sinkhole. There was some story about the sheep. All the sheep supposedly all went into the sinkhole together. Sheep aren't that stupid, and they've been living on that property for years and years and years, and for them to suddenly decide to go down the sinkhole makes absolutely no sense. And from what I remember, what I was told, it wasn't that big, so it would be pretty difficult to shove a bunch of sheep into it anyway. It's a very long, convoluted story.
What if we show the video from I think it was Today Tonight?
Great.
Because I think it really is quite potent to hear your father speak, because it's essentially sounds almost like a confession. well, yeah, it sounds like a confession. I'm just bringing it up now, just for people just to hear. Just make sure it's, can you see that in full screen or?
Yes, I can.
Yep, great. Here we go.
Now, that stunning new lead in the decades-old Beaumont case. As you would have seen in the news, a chilling video of a suspect has surfaced less than a week after his death. Now, members of Max McIntyre's own family are convinced their father was involved in Jane, Arnna and Grant's disappearance and that they know where the children are buried. Here's Mark Mooney with the details.
I know a lot about the Beaumont killing.
Put it to him directly, you know, were you involved, Max? He said, no, I wasn't, but I'll tell you who was.
My father was involved in the abduction and murder of the Beaumont children.
Could this man hold the key to Australia's greatest criminal mystery?
How did you come to track him down?
Inside his home on a remote property on York Peninsula, Max McIntyre opens up about the allegations that have dogged him for much of his life.
At the moment I'm researching the death of the Beaumonts because the only person who got to clear my name was me.
This never-before-seen interview, filmed in April 2015, is the only time he broke his silence. On Tuesday, Max died aged 89 and, according to his son Andrew, has taken the 50-year-old secret to his grave.
Exactly how much of a part he played, I'm not sure, but he was a major player in that. He disposed of the bodies.
While his father denied any involvement, he claims there was someone who may know what happened. That person is his one-time close friend, Scout leader Anthony Munro.
I want the whole bloody mess looked at. Now, I'll get around to who killed the Beaumonts in a minute.
Andrew first raised his own suspicions in a court case in 2008 after Max took out an injunction blocking he and his sister from entering his property. Since then, he's had trouble finding anyone who would listen to what he told the court about his father and Munro.
Now you want to know about Tony Munro.
Trying to tease the story out of him was investigative journalist Brian Littley.
We all hold hope that the Beaumont case can be solved, but I guess for me, I'm driven a little bit by the fear that I might actually have something that if I don't pass it on, it won't be solved.
Tony Munro had close relationships with numerous children through his scouting activities and a skin diving club he ran at Glenelg. It was around the time that Jane, Arnna and Grant Beaumont disappeared from the same beach. It was Australia Day 1966. Andrew McIntyre remembers that day like it was yesterday.
Our father told us he'd take us to the beach, but he changed his mind and left us home.
He says when his father and Munro returned, they were agitated and upset, and there was sand and blood in Munro's car.
The children were in the boot of his white Zephyr. My two sisters were taken to the boot, and my sister had to brush the blood out of their hair and sand out of their hair.
His father never told him what had happened and how the children came to be in the boot of the car.
Andrew McIntyre claims that 2 weeks after the Beaumonts disappeared, Munro drove him from Adelaide to his father's property here in Stansbury. He says he dropped him in the driveway and sped off. As Andrew walked towards the house, he noticed something had changed. The sinkhole at the back of the property had been filled in.
Anthony Munro brought me over to Stansbury to point me in that direction to see that the well had been filled in.
The reason he was given?
A flock of sheep had run down it, the sheep that lived on the property for years.
He's convinced the Beaumonts are buried there and believes the authorities have an obligation to dig it up.
My father liked to have his victims close handy, and he was a very cruel man, and I've always been terrified of him. I have constant nightmares about my father.
In 1990, Munro was jailed for abusing a child and later fled to Cambodia, where he ran ladyboy bars.
Police are looking at two possible victims. They are all under the age of 15 years old.
With the authorities there on his tail, he returned to Adelaide last year and pleaded guilty to the abuse of two more boys in 1965. One of those boys was Andrew McIntyre.
It took a long time coming. It had to be dragged out of him.
During this time, Munro was questioned over the Beaumonts, but police say there's no evidence linking him to the case. Andrew says even if they were only responsible for disposing of the bodies, his father and Munro must have known who was involved in the abduction and murder. Andrew's been concerned that since Max's death, his half-brother Danny has unwittingly destroyed some of their father's belongings.
We're just wondering why you're burning all your dad's stuff.
No, it's just wood, mate. I'm not saying a word.
Do you think Max had anything to do with the Beaumonts?
Absolutely not.
While police have investigated some of his claims, Andrew McIntyre says they've stopped listening.
He was a victim of Tony Munro's in 1965 and in 1966, at the time or around the time that the Beaumont children went missing. I think you've got to give him some credit that you can't believe half his story and not the rest of the story.
Certainly, Max knew that Munro was abusing Andrew.
I caught him in bed with my son. They were bundled and naked. I didn't make a scene. He was a boy, a beautiful boy. He was my son, and he was in love with the scoutmaster.
Andrew McIntyre says while his father will never face justice, it's not too late for others involved to be caught and punished.
All the evidence is out there. The witnesses are still alive, and we'd like to come forward and tell our story.
Hard to watch. Yeah, I mean, it's just
I can only imagine.
typical of my father. You could see by his reaction to, you know, he said he found them in bed together. He was more like he didn't make a scene. Excuse me. If any normal parent finds an adult in bed naked with their child, they would kill them.
100%.
And with every right.
Defend them.
So, and the law to a degree would protect them. Maybe not in South Australia.
Yeah, it's quite chilling. Something that I noticed as well, there was another video, Channel 7, like mainstream media, like we have to question everything that they say, but are they trying to steer the evidence from your father away to other suspects? Because they listed I think it was 5 suspects in this particular video. Your father, Tony Munro, Bevan Spencer Vaughan, Enum, sorry, don't know how to say that, Arthur Stanley Brown, and Don Storen. Now, do you think that that's they're all involved, or would you say that they're trying to perhaps change the story, or I don't know? It's
a diversion, I believe.
It's a diversion.
Like the Harry Phipps story is a diversion. So I think it was around 2019, after I'd gone to the International Tribunal for Natural Justice and given testimony there, and Andrew had done the same and given very convincing testimony, they suddenly decided they were going to dig up the Castelloy factory site, which was a site owned by Harry Phipps, otherwise known as the Saturn Man. And multiple books have been written about this, and quite a bit of money, I can imagine, has been made by the writing and selling of those books. It was very flimsy. It was one person's anecdotal evidence that they thought they'd seen the children at the man's property. There was no acknowledgement of having seen them dead, like my sister. There was no acknowledgement of having, been abused by one of that man's close friends, like my brother. There was no talk of, and apparently, there was just some idea that they might be in the grounds there. So they spent $250,000 digging it up, and they found animal bones. And there was a petition, 2,500 people, something like that, had asked for the dig to happen. We've got over 35,000 now asking for the dig at Stansbury, and it's still not enough. And it's interesting with that petition too; it's being suppressed, so you can't type in Stansbury petition and find it. You have to get the link. So that number would be way, way higher if it was still searchable.
Right. There's actually another video where I think you were there, Dee, and your brother, and you actually walked to the actual location, because it looks like they've excavated it and changed the look of it completely to what it used to be like. So it's almost like you can't recognize it.
Yes, with my father watching on and directing the bulldozer to make sure it didn't go near the sinkhole. He was very careful to make sure it didn't get disturbed. Yeah. Then he tried to sue and say that it wasn't the way he wanted it. We've got photographs of him there. It's just he's just weird that way. He was always blaming other people for what he'd done. Getting back to the other people being highlighted as supposedly, you know, the people that did the perpetrating against the Beaumonts. There's this photograph of a man on the beach that's constantly being brought out every Australia Day, and they'll probably do it again this year. And they try to link that man on the beach to, and he was just there watching a search. Now, they always try and link him to Vaughan. He's not Vaughan. I've named the man in a video that I put up recently on the 31st of December of last year. It's a guy called Brian. I won't give his surname. I'm not saying anything against Brian, but that is who was on the beach that day. It's got nothing to do with Vaughan. So Mike Smithson.
They don't actually look alike. I'll watch that video.
No,
yeah.
Nothing alike. Nothing alike. It's exactly like Brian. And Brian was photographed with another of my father's very close friends, John Pike, who's serving 18 years for child sex abuse, presently in jail. This man, Brian, was photographed with John Pike and by Tony Munro's camera in 66. So, yeah, he was hanging around with pedophiles, but he's not fun on him.
Have you heard much from the actual parents of the Beaumont children? Do they get involved at all, or?
No, heard nothing. I've heard nothing. I know Nancy died on my birthday a couple of years ago. It's rather disturbing.
Yeah. Wow. Where do we move from here?
I don't know. I'd just like to urge people to sign the petition if they can find it. I don't know if you're planning to share the link, Alan.
Yeah. I do have it somewhere. I just
and I know people get really up in arms about petitions.
I'll share it after, because I don't have it open at the moment, but I will share it after, and I'll put a link for everyone to sign.
Because it's the numbers, you know, 35,000 is a big number of people that have this investigated. And if it was anything else, I mean, there was a couple of years back, some little kid had some idea that there was something underground and they went and exhumed it, and it's just like a slap in the face. So, you know, and I'm not saying they shouldn't investigate what people, you know, say should be investigated, but to ignore the Stansbury property for all of this time is just ridiculous. And I believe it's not simply because they don't want to dig up the Beaumont children. There's a Pandora's box of evidence on that property. My brother, Danny, did burn a lot of stuff on the day my father died, or the night. He died in the evening, 1 o'clock in the morning, Danny's burning. And the people who were present, the journalists and the other people present, said it smelled like burning hair and flesh. So my father, this is really horrific, but my father kept trophies of his victims. So I think that some of those trophies would have been dried and kept somewhere, and I think that's what was being burnt, plus his papers of research. My father, in his will, bequeathed his papers, his important papers of research, to my cousin, Martin Hamilton Smith, who was a politician here in South Australia. He was the head of the Liberal Party for some time before he defected to Labor and then ended his career. So those important papers of research need to be either Martin got them or he didn't. Maybe Danny burnt them. I don't know, but they need to be found. So my father was a very clever man. He would have kept copies. Other people would have copies, I'm sure.
That's right. That's why it's so important to keep talking about this and share this information, because, well, what else can we do? We can't just do nothing. And I think that's a lot of the problem why we are faced with what we're faced in this world today, is because people are too consumed with their own selves, unfortunately, and their own egos. And I get it, like people have bills to pay, their families to look after. I get it. But if we're not looking out for each other and the communities, because we've lost that sense of community, I think, well, a lot of it's being rebuilt, because I'm seeing a lot now throughout the last 3 years. I think a lot of people have woken up, but it's still not enough. And because we're like, this is a global issue, because even if you're not awake, at some level in your consciousness, we are all connected. So if someone else is suffering, if there are a group of people suffering, let's say, you know, out there in the world, it does actually affect me on some level. And I don't think people realize that how that plays a part in our collective reality. It's so important, because but if we're like this in tunnel vision, like I spent most of my life like that, and you know, it's self-inflicted suffering. So maybe we can talk a little bit about your healing, because I think that with a lot of children that, or even adults, you know, all ages, that, or anyone that has suffered some sort of abuse, that doesn't want to speak out, because not everyone has to, but some people might want to, or maybe you can share a little bit about your personal healing and how what triggered you to start speaking out.
Okay, so obviously an aspect of my abuse was not just the sexual abuse and the trafficking and the ritual abuse, it was also MK Ultra abuse. So MK Ultra is a mind control program, and there's many different subsets. Part of my mind control was I was trained psychically. There's psychic ability on both sides of my family, but what that actually helped me with was the fact that I had a connection to what I would describe as spirit guides that were very protective and helped me throughout my childhood. And people who don't believe in that stuff might just say it's a form of dissociation, and that's fine if they want to believe that. That's not a problem. That was one sort of coping mechanism, and that's helped me immensely with my healing, because I recognize that this is just one lifetime. There are many millions of lifetimes that we might experience as a soul, and in many different life forms. So we don't have to just be human, we can be many of the different forms on Earth, or perhaps on other planets. It's pretty unlikely that we're the only planet in the world that in the universe or the multiverse that contains intelligent life. So I try to look at everything from a 40-foot perspective, so that I'm not just thinking, oh, poor me, there's horrible things happen to me and nobody's doing anything about, investigating it. I look at it from a completely different point of view. I'm looking at it as, in this lifetime, I am going to do everything that I can to bring justice, but I'm also going to have a balanced life and do the things that make me happy. So I don't live this 24/7. I put out 4 videos in the last month, which is way more than I plan to do in the future, but I needed to get that evidence out as quickly as possible. So another part of my healing was recognizing that on a soul level, as much as I despise my father, I have forgiven him on a soul level, because to not do so was damaging to me. So I know that we had this experience in this lifetime because there's something is going to come out of it that makes it worthwhile. And I believe it is being an example of not giving up, perhaps, or being that irritation to those that hurt me, that I haven't shut up yet. I'm living proof that their MK Ultra mind control is crap. It doesn't work. So I hope that is something that niggles at them and worries them. Not that I want to be nasty, but there's a reason why I'm still here. So a lot of my healing also came around writing down what I had experienced. It's very cathartic to write things down, because when you don't, it swims around in your mind constantly, and it's constantly re-traumatizing you. When it's written down, it puts it in its place so that you can then put it aside. And it also means that you can go back to it at a later date if you need to. So a lot of what I've been putting out recently, it's all filed away in many different places, digitally or physically, and I've always got access to it. So it's interesting. It'll be a book eventually. So everything is worth doing well. And so, another part of it is physical exercise is incredibly powerful. If you marry both sides of the brain by doing things like swimming, knitting, anything that uses both hands is incredibly helpful when it comes to this. And finding like-minded people who've gone through the same thing is also incredibly helpful. Because if you're going through this on your own, you feel crazy, you feel like nobody understands. You find other people who've gone through the same thing, you find out what their healing techniques were, and then you can join together, and then you can help other people that way as well. So lots of different things that you can do.
It's like you're using your voice as well. So that's because you're letting it out. Otherwise, you're keeping it in. That energy becomes trapped within your body. But if you know how to transform that energy by having these outlets and speaking to people, that's a massive key. And that helped me a lot with some of the issues I had growing up. And it's really important to reach out. And it's hard to reach out because you've been taught to not do that. Stay quiet or don't say anything. People are going to think this, they're going to think that, you know. Yeah. So have you had a lot of, since you've been speaking out, have you had a lot of other survivors or victims reach out to you?
Oh, countless. Some are now my closest friends, but I can't count the number, and various different walks of life and various different forms of abuse as well. So it's interesting when you talk about, you know, abuse at this level, it triggers other people to remember their abuse. And then they'll come forward and say, you know, my abuse wasn't as bad as yours. And I just want to say to everybody, your experience is your own, and what hurts you is hurtful. It doesn't matter if somebody else seems to have gone through worse. So I can't count the number. What disturbs me the most is the parents that are having their children stolen by the Department of Child Protection and the South Australian Police, and all over the country and all over the world at the moment. That is utterly horrific, and that keeps me awake at night, because it's a billion dollar industry. Dee probably explained to you, she worked out it was roughly about 60 billion in Australia each year. It's enormously powerful. It's bigger than the automotive industry. So we're
talking like family courts, out of home care, NDIS, you know, all privatized corporations now, and they keep changing their names so that you can't, you know, trace them, and it's massive. It's massive.
Yeah, it is. It's huge. That's why it's important to speak up. Not that it's a requirement of people who've gone through that sort of abuse, but, and look, this is the thing, those children that survive that will grow up, and there'll be lots of them, and they will remember the names and faces of the people that abused them. So these people are fighting a war that they are going to lose. It is inevitable. And so that's also something that people need to keep in mind. It doesn't mean we just stop and wait for it to happen.
Yeah.
They are, the tipping point we've reached it already.
Another thing that I found interesting is because I speak about this a lot to people, just anytime I can come into a conversation, I try to bring it up, whether they're asleep or not asleep, doesn't matter. And I always it's interesting the level of response that I get from different people, depending on where they're at. Some people just cannot even listen or hear it at all. Some people, you can feel them shut down. And some people just burst into tears.
Yeah.
And it shows me that everyone's at different levels because it's like, when you are faced with someone else's trauma, it's like you're looking at that trauma within yourself. That's how I sort of wrap my head around it. Because when I listened to you back in 2021, it hit me so hard, and I felt, I don't know, it was really interesting because I felt like such a strong connection to you and your story, but it didn't happen to me. But it kind of like, I don't know, it was maybe it happened in a past life, then I haven't resolved that trauma or something like that. I don't know. I can't really explain it, but I knew that I couldn't not look at it anymore. I had to look at it. It was just something that I had to do. Otherwise, what am I doing here? I don't know. And I think that everyone's at different levels and different stages. But we've got to collectively continue to look at it, because there's so many people that need help.
Yeah. And this, you know, this is the thing. People need to wrap their head around this, as horrible as it is. And I wouldn't want to look at it. If it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't be watching it. I'm sure I'd be off playing with my animals somewhere. But this is what makes the world go round. This is how people get power. They blackmail each other. That's how everything is run. In the higher echelons, they are all doing it to each other. That's why secret services exist, to do this sort of work. It used to be prostitutes, and then it was male prostitutes if they were gay, and they were controlled that way. Now it's children, and it's been children for, you know, many decades. So if you want to know how the world runs, you kind of got to listen to people like myself to get a bit of an understanding around it. You don't have to do it all day, every day. You know, nobody would want to do that. I don't do that. But, you know, just to let it come into your consciousness and try to, you know, share it with other people, as much as that's difficult as well. So, you know, kudos to you, darling, because you're doing a great job. Because it's not fun. It's not a fun topic. You don't make friends with salad. You don't make friends with SRA. No. Definitely not.
I have definitely had my challenges with it as well, because it's but there's a, I don't know. I'm figuring it out still. I'm figuring it out, and it's okay because I don't need to know. I don't need to have all the answers.
Yeah.
It's just like you're taking a step one day at a time, and I know that all the steps that I've taken in the past, and I'm sure you can probably relate to this, building what you have today. So the thing is that we have to continue to move forward and also stay present at the same time. It's quite like a, yeah, you practice doing things right. I don't know. So like, let's say if someone wanted to find, because I know that you've got a lot of videos that I've seen, and the amount of research that you have done is enormous and it's fantastic. So if people want to find you, where's the best place?
So just search my name. I'm on Rumble and I'm on BitChute. I'm on Telegram. I'm not on Facebook anymore. Anything you see on Facebook is not me. I do have a page there, but I haven't been on it for at least a year. It's probably about it, really. That's where I'm at. I'm on YouTube as well, but I'm trying to get off YouTube, so I only put 1-minute videos up telling people to go to BitChute and Rumble now.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Was there anything else that you wanted to say before we finish up?
Just thank you for bringing attention to this. You know, it really is appreciated. It helps a lot. So the more people who do it, the better.
Awesome. All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for spending the time out in your evening, having a chat. I look forward to connecting with you again down the track. If there's anything that you ever want to share, any new information, just let me know. You know, it's
Will do. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. And guys, I just want to take this opportunity to inform everyone that with the interview that I did a couple of weeks ago, Operation Noetics, there's a court case happening up in Brisbane on the 8th of February. I'll be heading up there. There's going to be a few people gathering there. I will quickly just share the picture. Where did I put it? Actually, what I'll do is I'll just jump on my Telegram. It's on there. I can't find it now. And yeah, cool. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Please share this out there, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right. Now I've got to find the video. All right, guys. See you later.